Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister aware that today's report from the National Audit Office shows that the government sold Rover for at least £60 million less than it was worth? Will the Prime Minister now make a public apology for this gross incompetence?
Mr. Speaker, apart from the year it sold Jaguar, Rover had not made a profit since 1976. It was a major achievement successfully to privatize this company, and the government struck the best deal it believed it could in all the circumstances of the sale.
But, Mr. Speaker, doesn't the Prime Minister recall that this is the second time in 2 years that the government has shortchanged the British public by selling off assets? Mr. Speaker, it happened with Royal Ordnance, it's happening with Rover, and tomorrow it's going to happen on a monstrous scale with the sell-off of water. When is the government going to stop asset stripping the country?
No, Mr. Speaker. Rover Leyland had not made a profit at all, except in the year when it sold Jaguar. It was only able to carry on at all because of a government guarantee to trade creditors and a government guarantee to the banks. The liability building up on the British taxpayer was enormous. It was a very good thing to be able to privatize Rover under those circumstances.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister think that that in any way excuses selling off a company for £60 million less than it was worth?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if it was such a good bargain, why did the tea user unions not try to buy it first?
Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would the Prime Minister be good enough to tell us which of the policies that she leaves to her successor she now thinks should be scrapped?
Mr. Speaker, I am happy that my successor will carry on the excellent policies that in fact have finished with the decline of socialism and have brought great prosperity to this country, which have raised Britain's standing in the world and in fact have brought about a truly capital-owning democracy.
But, Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister thinks that nothing should be changed, can she tell us why on earth all of those now competing for her job are desperately wriggling around trying to find a way out of the poll tax trap?
On the contrary, I really rather thought that they were keeping the poll. Community charge or deposit, and whatever review they have, the result will be infinitely better than going back to the rates, which of course will be the worst of all worlds.
May I, Mr. Speaker, since this could conceivably be the last time that the Prime Minister answers, say to her that her honest approach on the poll tax is commendable, because she's demonstrating that there are two and only two honest approaches. One is to keep the poll tax intact, as she wants. The other one is to abolish it entirely, as we will do.
No, Mr. Speaker, that is not correct. As with any new tax, one always both reviews it and continually amends it. I would have thought the Right Honourable Gentleman would have known that after this time.
Order. Well, I'm anxious to call as many honourable members as possible.
Mr. Speaker, may I offer my personal congratulations to the Right Honourable Gentleman on becoming Prime Minister. Since the Right Honourable Gentleman says he was bounced into the poll tax, is he now going to abolish it?
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for his welcome to the dispatch box. I look forward to our discussions over the forthcoming year. Insofar as the community charge is concerned, I've made it perfectly clear what the position will be. We have decided that we will look again. We have decided we have decided that we will look again and see what further refinements may be necessary to the community charge. What refinements may be necessary to ensure that the community charge is accepted throughout the country.
Mr. Speaker, can I offer some help to the right honourable gentleman? I suggested, it's well intended, by suggesting that he could save himself a great deal of time and trouble and the British people a great deal of money by accepting Labour Party policy and abolishing the poll tax now.
My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State of the Environment, will be taking forward a very constructive and fundamental review of the community charge. And in doing so, he will take account of the points made by my honourable friends, both north and south of the Scottish border, before we reach conclusions. On this side of the House, we believe in examining matters before reaching conclusions.
Mr. Speaker, everybody knows, including, I suspect, the right honourable gentleman, there is only one fundamental, efficient and fair thing to do with the poll tax, and that's scrap it.
The right honourable gentleman forgets the alternative that he himself has decided to move back to. Was it not the right honourable gentleman who said himself in 1980, the most unjust of all taxes, local rates, which take most from those who afford least?
Madam Speaker, does the Prime Minister recall his promise in the election that a Tory victory would provide the spark to ignite recovery, as he put it? Would the Prime Minister now admit that no such ignition has taken place and that there will be no real recovery as long as he continues with the policies that have already brought us 2 full years of recession?
I will turn directly to that point in a moment, if I may, for the right honourable gentleman. But let me say to him, for this is the last occasion we will be able to exchange our comments over the dispatch box in this fashion, that we have done so on many occasions in the last 20 months. We have often disagreed, sometimes we've agreed. But I would like to thank the right honourable gentleman. I would like to... Madam Speaker, the honourable gentleman's quite wrong. I'm staying. I would like to thank the right honourable gentleman for his support at times of crisis, for his strong support throughout the Gulf War, for the support he has given us throughout the difficulties in Yugoslavia, and on many occasions when he and I have had to deal privately with matters and he has without exception respected the competences of those occasions. I am very pleased to have the opportunity to thank him for that and to do so publicly and with warmth. May I say, in direct response to his question, that he will know the view both of the OECD and the London Business School, both of whose latest surveys forecast that recovery will be underway from the second quarter of this year. We share that view.
Madam Speaker, can I say to the Prime Minister that I'm very grateful to him for his kind remarks and that I've considered it to be a great honour to be able to serve my country in the way that I could. I know that this is a vocation that he shares, and I hope that the country generally and the people in it can achieve greater success in the future. Can I put it to the Prime Minister that his strategy of perpetuating recession and high unemployment in an attempt to suppress inflation has all of the features in that combination of the slump of the 1930s. For the sake of our country, therefore, can I also put it to him that he should now recognize that to continue with those same policies will not bring durable or sustainable recovery and will certainly not bring a country at ease with itself.
Well, I respect the view the right honourable gentleman expresses, but I must say to him, in all sincerity, that I cannot agree with him about that. the basis of sustained recovery and the growth, the jobs, the prosperity and the security that everyone in this House would wish for all of our citizens can only be based on sustainable growth and low inflation. Unless we have that low inflation as a base, we will not get a form of growth that is sustainable. I know it is not easy. I know it is uncomfortable. I know it is frustrating when that growth doesn't immediately appear. But I know of no other way to ensure the medium and long-term growth and prosperity of our nation. And I am determined to stick to the policies that I believe are in our medium and long-term good.
Madam Speaker, can I say to the Prime Minister with equal sincerity that there is now a very great danger that after 2 years of recession, to continue with the policies of the present is to risk driving the economy down so far as to make the prospect of recovery recede by years. I hope that he'll use this summer to think again about the course of that policy and adopt different policies that give this country and our people the chance of jobs and growth and success, which we have not enjoyed in this immediate past.
Well, we can both agree upon what the objective is, though I regret we don't agree upon the basis necessary to achieve that objective. But I think one does need to look at what is happening. The volume of exports were at a record level in May. Our volume share in world trade has recovered after being in decline for many years. Car sales are increasing. Producer price inflation is at a very low level indeed. The ingredients are there. And I return to the independent view both of the OECD and the London Business School that recovery will be underway in the second half of this year. And it will recovery that is based on a rate of inflation that is far lower than anyone in this House predicted it would be 18 months ago. And it is from that basis that we will get the growth we would all wish to see.
John Smith.
Madam Speaker, since it is crystal clear that yesterday, whatever else he did, the President of the Board of Trade did not announce a review of the pit closure programme, will the Prime Minister now agree to establish a genuine and independent review before any pit is closed forever?
Let me make clear, so there is no dispute or misunderstanding anywhere in the House, of the position both of the 10 pits and of the remaining pits that were mentioned in my right honourable friend's statement yesterday. The 10 pits that he specifically named, in our judgment, have no sustainable economic future, but they will go through the full statutory review procedure. But during the moratorium on the other pits, the Trade and Industry Select Committee, I have no doubt, will wish to hold their own inquiry, and the government will give that their fullest cooperation. During the moratorium, the President of the Board of Trade will himself take views and evidence to consider alongside the information already available to him. In due course, on all matters, in due course, he will publish that in time for consideration by this House before any future debate in the House of Commons. And his statement will be set in the context of the government's energy policy and will set out the consequences of that policy for British coal, the implications for individual pits, and the employment prospects for the industry. It is after that debate that future decisions will be taken.
Could I remind the Prime Minister of the question I asked him, which was whether he would establish a genuine and independent review? If Madam Speaker, if the Prime Minister really believes he has a strong case, what has he to lose from an independent inquiry? What is he afraid of?
Well, let me refer the right honourable gentleman to the answer I gave. When we have completed the consultation and the examination, which I repeat will be made public, and I repeat also will be laid before this House, there will be every opportunity for every view to be taken into account before matters proceed.
John Smith.
But Madam Speaker, is it not now clear that the only satisfactory alternative to constantly shifting statements from the Prime Minister and the President of the Board of Trade and to the unseemly Dutch auction which is going on amongst backbenchers opposite is for this House tomorrow night to vote to refer the whole matter to our own select committee, and for that to be the responsibility of members in all parts of the House.
Well, it is now clear, Madam Speaker, that the Right Honourable Gentleman was not listening. For I said it was an assumption of the government that the Trade and Select Committee would wish to consider this matter, and that we would provide whatever evidence was necessary to this committee. But I must say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, notwithstanding the tremendous emotions that have arisen about this whole affair, I must say it is bogus of him not to recall the vast number of mines that have been closed by his government, the large number of miners put out of work by his government, and the activities of his government in recent years that played a significant part in reducing employment in the mining industry from 700,000 down to the present level.
Madam Speaker, is not the cry for a referendum on Europe further and compelling evidence that the Prime Minister's cabinet and party are hopelessly divided? Is it not astonishing? Is it not astonishing that battle is permitted to rage even within the Treasury? Does the Prime Minister support his Chancellor or his Chief Secretary?
Well, I think as the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, and as I've made clear to the House on many occasions in the past, I'm sceptical about referendums. I made that clear during the Maastricht debate, and I haven't changed my mind about that. As far as the Intergovernmental Conference is concerned, there's not even a specific agenda yet. I don't believe the question of a referendum arises now, and it certainly doesn't need to be decided now. It's not yet possible to say what the outcome of the conference will be, and I can assure the Right Honourable Gentleman I do not intend to come back to this House with a package that this House would find unacceptable.
But, Madam Speaker, on the question of referendums, does the Prime Minister recall telling this House on the 6th of May last year, and I quote his words exactly, "We are a parliamentary democracy and I am not in favour of referendums." Has the movement... Madam Speaker, today he expressed scepticism. Is the movement from opposition to scepticism because he's running in front of the anti-Europeans?
The Right Honourable Gentleman, if he'd listened very carefully, would also hear me say, I have not changed my mind, as I did a moment or so ago. As far as a single European currency is concerned, as I've indicated before, decisions on that are a long way off. That isn't going to be determined in 1996. No one expects that this Parliament is going to be asked to decide on a single European currency. That would be a matter for a future Parliament, in circumstances no one can predict. And it was my negotiating at Maastricht that made clear that this department would have the right to decide upon that matter at a future date. And even if I wished to, I could not bind a future Parliament on its decisions.
If that answer by the Prime Minister is to be construed as ruling out a referendum in the future, can we be assured that every member of his government will be asked to support it or will be asked to resign?
Well, I just set out the position entirely clearly for the Right Honourable Gentleman. And I made it entirely clear to him it wouldn't be appropriate now to make a commitment now about a future Parliament's decision. Even if I wished to, I couldn't bind a future Parliament. And my personal decision on referendums has been made entirely clearly on other occasions and again today. I reiterate, I have not changed my mind.
Tony Blair.
Now that today we have another report by Cabinet Secretary exonerating another government minister, can we just be clear about the basis upon which he's running the government? A week ago, there were unsubstantiated allegations, he said, against his trade minister, and he insisted that he stayed. A few days later, there were allegations that were supposed to be unfounded, as he called them, and he insisted that he went. Now there are new unsubstantiated allegations against the Chief Secretary, and he stays. What is the basis upon which he decides to retain or dismiss his government ministers? The truth of the allegations or merely the number of them?
Well, I had understood, Madam Speaker, that when the Right Honourable Gentleman became leader of the Labour Party, we were going to see we were going to see a new style in politics. I had not expected to see him step down into the gutters of public life quite so speedily. Let me make it clear to the House and to the right honourable gentleman. I set out the position concerning my honourable friends for Beaconsfield and Tatton in my statement to the House the other day, and I had nothing further to say. As far as my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, and my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, are concerned, the examination shows there is nothing for them to answer to, and the right honourable gentleman should be ashamed of using the privilege of this House to raise those matters in this way.
As the Prime Minister knows perfectly well, I have not said that I agree with the allegations against any government. No, I have not. But the idea that after the resignation of 2 government ministers in a week, we should not be entitled to ask questions from this side of the House is absurd. Can't he see the problem will not be resolved? The problem will not be resolved unless he understands that the Butler reports are plainly inadequate, since on his own admission Sir Robin Butler is not able to see the person making the complaints, Mr. Al-Fayed. He has forbidden the Nolan Committee to look at the allegations. The Privileges Committee is deadlocked because his members want to sit in private. I repeat, because his members want to sit in private, and he will only take a grip on this problem when he understands that there has to be a proper method of investigating the allegations of Mr. Al-Fayed in which the public has confidence, and that means an open, full investigation in public view.
Well, Madam Speaker, now there is no doubt. We now know where we are with the right honourable gentleman, and we know precisely what way he plans to play with politics. The right honourable gentleman says to the House that he doesn't believe that the allegations are substantiated, yet still he is prepared in here to peddle them. And the whole House will have noticed that he's prepared to peddle them. As far as the Privileges Committee is concerned, there is only one thing stopping the Privileges Committee proceeding, and that is that the right honourable gentleman's honourable friends will not attend that committee. Wholly against all precedent in this House. The right honourable gentleman is a lawyer. He knows investigations are in private. When those matters are over, debate is in public. He would change that for his own party advantage. As far as the Al-Fayed allegations are concerned, if the right honourable gentleman had listened, he would have heard that those the documents relating to this were passed to the Director of Public Prosecutions, have now been passed by her after examination to the Metropolitan Police for examination. He surely cannot imagine I'm going to add to that.
Right, with all due respect, he's not being asked to add to it. It is not me. It is...
Order! Order! A moment. I have some order in this House. Mr. Blair.
Will he understand? It is not me that has dismissed 2 of his government ministers. It is him. And furthermore, the normal procedure in courts of law is that hearings are in public. Now, nobody on this side is saying whether these allegations are true or false, merely that they should be investigated. Why won't he allow that to happen in public?
So the right honourable gentleman says that the matters may not be true. They may be unsubstantiated gossip, and yet he wants them peddled in public so that people's reputations can be harmed.
Order! I will allow order from both sides of this House. Prime Minister.
Despite the fact that the right honourable gentleman does not believe these allegations, does not believe there's anything substantial in them, he still wants to see them examined in public. And I think people will ask, for what party political reason does he want to see them established in public? If this is to be the new clean politics, Madam Speaker, let us have the old dirty politics from Labour we've been used to.
Madam
Speaker, in view of the apparent confusion in briefings from ministers over recent days, can the right honourable gentleman please tell the House which companies and which classes of companies are likely to be liable for the windfall tax? And can he also please explain to the House why the chairman of British Telecom apparently felt that his company would not be liable?
Well, if I can say to the right honourable gentleman, first of all, I did hear what the chairman of British Telecom said the other day, and I was delighted, of course, that he indicated he had the good judgment to vote Labour in the general election. But I have to say that the idea that somehow the chairman of British Telecom, or indeed anyone else, was in any doubt that we were going to introduce a windfall tax, I find rather hard to say. Now, the actual companies, as the right honourable gentleman knows, we said this many times, will be decided by the Chancellor in accordance with the normal precedent, which is to do any moves in relation to the budget in his budget. Now, that would be the proper way to do it. And those companies and the amount of the windfall tax will be decided by him in the normal way.
Mr. Major.
Mr. Surian's vote. He seems to be rather regretting that already, but I will let that pass for the moment. I find it surprising that the House of Commons is to be the last to be told who will be liable to the tax in view of the private briefings that are going on. But perhaps the right honourable gentleman can confirm to the House that no one acting in his capacity or no one from the Labour Party when in opposition gave any indication clearly or in terms of a nod and a wink that British Telecom would not be included in this tax. Can the Prime Minister be categorical about that, please?
Madam Speaker, I certainly can be categorical. Everybody has known that the decisions on who is going to be liable for the windfall tax will be taken by my right honourable friend the Chancellor in the normal way. And indeed, I may say, British Telecom and everyone else. And indeed, if I may say so, it is perfectly obvious that that should be the case. It would be wholly wrong prior to the budget if my right honourable friend either were to announce the companies or the amounts of the windfall tax. And I have to say this in addition to him. In following that precedent, we are, of course, following precisely what the last Conservative government did in relation to the windfall tax on banks.
Mr. Major.
The House will note that the right honourable gentleman replied in the generality but did not reply specifically and provide the House with a categoric assurance that I ask him for. Perhaps he will do so in just a moment. If this tax proceeds with an extra tax on gas, water, electricity and telephones, may I return to the point made by my honourable friend the member for Esher and Walton. If that were to give rise to an increase in the bills for many people on low incomes in this country, will the right honourable gentleman follow the precedent of the previous government and increase the social security benefits to compensate for that? And if not, will he accept that the populist tax he proposes on fat cats would in fact be a tax that hits most those that have least?
No, Madam Speaker. No, I shall resist the temptation to say that was the soundbite, since I know... Since I have a feeling I used to use a few of those myself at one time. Madam Speaker, no, that is not the case at all. In fact, there is a cap, of course, on prices. Indeed, some of the regulators have already said that they would not consider it right for the windfall tax to lead to any increase in prices. I may also say this to the right honourable gentleman. The reason for introducing the windfall tax is clear. There is no doubt at all that excess profits, vast excess profits, were made. There is no doubt of that. There is no doubt also that it is absolutely essential that we give hope and opportunity to those hundreds of thousands of young people presently without it in our society today. And I think there will be a great deal of agreement, not just amongst those that don't have opportunity, but even amongst those that are perfectly well off in our society at the moment, that if we don't tackle the problems of a growing underclass of people cut off from society's mainstream without any chance of a job, with poor educational opportunity, without the chance to do well in life, then we will end up, as the previous government did, paying more and more by way of welfare bills and having less and less for future investment.
Mr. Major.
Can the... Madam Speaker, can the Prime Minister confirm that after his government has completed its review of the National Health Service, all pensioners will still receive free prescriptions as of right?
Madam Speaker, first of all, if I can say to the right honourable gentleman, I know this will be his very last question time. I would simply like to wish him well, as I'm sure the whole House will, in retirement, and to say that however strong our clashes, he always behaved with very good nature and dignity. In respect of the review of the National Health Service, of course, once you start ruling out things, then people say, well, you've ruled this in, you've ruled this out. I can absolutely assure him of one thing, that at the end of that review, we will have a National Health Service that is fully consistent with the principles that we have set out. Those principles being that the health service will be based on need, not ability to pay, and will be fully consistent with our manifesto. And he should not pay too much attention to stories in the press.
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for his graceful remarks at the outset of his reply, but perhaps not very enlightened by the rest of his reply, which firstly did not address my question, and secondly amounted to a definite maybe. Can I please quote what his cabinet colleague, the Education Secretary, has said, and I quote, "Charges are nothing more than an alternative form of taxation, regressive and highly damaging. In the case of the National Health Service, this amounts to a medical poll tax." Does the right honourable gentleman agree?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I do, which is one of the reasons why we want to review many of the charges imposed by his government as a result of 18 years of Conservative government. And if I may just say this, Madam Speaker, yes, we are in government now, and the big problem that we have is the mess that we left by the previous government. And if I may just say one or two of the things that we will be looking at. First of all, for example, the prescription fraud that costs around £85 million a year. The fact that we have inherited a situation where 59 out of 100 health authorities are in deficit as a result of his government. And that is why it is sensible, as any government should, that we look at getting value for money in the National Health Service. But we will make sure that it is consistent with principle and with our manifesto commitments.
Mr. Major.
I'm tempted to ask, Madam Speaker, if anyone in the House has the faintest idea what that nonsense might mean. I'm tempted to ask for a show of hands opposite to see if anyone knows. Let me try and help the right honourable gentleman. As a matter of principle, will he or will he not rule out prescription charges for pensioners and so-called hotel charges for hospital visits? It's a straightforward question, yes or no?
Yes. Madam Speaker, as I've already said to the right honourable gentleman, these matters that he has raised have been press speculation. They are nothing. The review that we will carry out should be an open-ended review. And what happens is if you start ruling this thing out and that thing out, then people say those things, then everything else is ruled in. If you don't rule it out, then you've ruled the other things. It is absolute nonsense. He asked for a clear statement on the National Health Service. I will give him it. We will have a National Health Service restored to the basic principles of the British National Health Service. The health service that we founded and his government undermined. His government spent £1.75 billion on health service bureaucracy. We will spend that money on patient care. And yes, we will look at the right way of getting value for money in the National Health Service. Not through Tory methods, by making sure people get a fair deal from the health service again.
The more the right honourable gentleman goes off the point, the more he loses the point. I think we now know the answer, Madam Speaker. The answer is yes. If the Prime Minister can get away with it, there will be charges. I see the Chancellor nodding. If the Prime Minister can get away with it, there will be more charges on pensioners and there will be hotel charges. Can you explain to the House how that squares with his manifesto promise, which I quote, "If you are ill or injured, there will be a National Health Service here to help, and access will be based on need and need alone." No mention, Madam Speaker, of charges.
Can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, I reconfirm precisely those words here today. And, you know, the cheek of this lot talking about health service charges. Who were the people that put up prescription charges 15 times in a row? Who are the people that ran the National Health Service in such a way that people have had to go to take private health care because they can't get proper health care in the health service? Who are the people that ended their term of office, 20,000 more managers, 50,000 fewer nurses? What about the pensions, he said? We wouldn't have imposed VAT on fuel on pensioners. The idea that that party opposite can ever have any credibility on the health service is a joke. We are the party that built it and will reform it, but we'll do it in the right way based on need, not ability to pay.
John Major.
It was all very interesting, Madam Speaker, but had nothing to do with my question, which the right honourable gentleman has dodged time and time again. And does not his sorry inability to answer a straightforward, direct question illustrate what we're learning about him daily? This was the right honourable gentleman who was prepared during the election to frighten pensioners by saying their pensions were at risk, and is the same right honourable gentleman now prepared to put their free National Health Service treatment at risk. Is this what the right honourable gentleman meant when he asked the British nation to trust him?
Madam Speaker, the right honourable gentleman says, why couldn't I answer his question in a straight way? He asked me whether I agreed with the words of my right honourable friend, and I said yes. I can't get much straighter than that. I do agree with them. But I was just sitting there thinking, of course, who was it that introduced eye tests? They did. Who was it that introduced dental charges? They did. Who was it that ran the National Health Service in such a way that in many parts of the country there is no National Health Service dental treatment? They did. Now, I say to the right honourable gentleman, with very, very great respect, his party will never be believed over the National Health Service, not in a million years because of what they've done. People do know there are difficult choices, and they want a party that believes in the health service to take them.
May I agree with the Prime Minister on his last answer. But when the honourable member for Blaenau Gwent...
Order, Mr. Hayes. Order.
When the honourable member for Blaenau Gwent says he was threatened with expulsion from the Labour Party if he campaigned against a Welsh Assembly in the forthcoming referendum, and the Secretary of State for Wales denies it, which one of them is telling the truth?
Well, Madam Speaker, I can assure the right honourable gentleman, who I again welcome to the dispatch box, that no one has been threatened with expulsion for having said that they are perfectly entitled to state their position, provided, of course, they do so in accordance with the rules of the parliamentary party.
So let the whole House get it clear. Let the whole House get it clear. When the honourable member for Blaenau Gwent says that he was told twice that he would be kicked out of the Labour Party if he stood up for his beliefs, we have the Prime Minister's personal assurance that he was not telling the truth.
I can give my personal assurance that no such threat was made.
Yeah.
Stay.
In that case, Madam Speaker, who authorised... Mr. Hugh Roberts, a special advisor at the Welsh office, to tell local council officials that their relationship with the Welsh office would be jeopardised if their local MP did not support the policy of the Labour Party? Don't local council officials have a higher responsibility to the wider electorate and not to the unity of the Labour Party?
Madam Speaker, that is absolutely right. And I can tell the right honourable gentleman that I have asked for an investigation of this, and I am told... if you just wait a minute, and I'm told that that allegation is untrue as well, so perhaps now he would withdraw it.
Hey.
The whole House will hope that it is untrue, and the whole House will look forward. The whole House will look forward to seeing the result of the investigation in due course. But just so that we have this absolutely clear, when the Secretary of State for Wales tells the Daily Telegraph that individuals in the Labour Party must not flout the party election manifesto, but the Secretary of State for Scotland tells this House a few weeks ago that any MP has a right to speak his or her mind as he sees fit, which one of them was speaking for the government?
Madam Speaker, I've just made it clear. People are perfectly... Perhaps I'll make it clear again. One, members of Parliament are perfectly entitled to speak their mind. Two, there is no truth in the allegation that pressure was put on councils or they'd be told that they couldn't have the resources or any of the rest of it. If that were the case, it would be quite wrong. It isn't the case, and perhaps now the Right Honourable Gentleman withdraw the allegation.
Will the Prime Minister therefore...
Order, House must come to order, Mr.
Will he therefore give us a cast-iron guarantee that he will come to this House with the result of that investigation? Does he not regard it as an extraordinary state of affairs that different cabinet ministers give conflicting views on this matter, that investigations into it have to be mounted, and what will he do to stop the arrogant behaviour of his government on these matters and to ensure there is an honest and open debate?
I think, unfortunately, and I understand these problems, I think he prepared the last question before he heard the answer. I've just made it clear that I investigated this morning. There is no truth in these allegations. People are perfectly entitled to speak their mind. They are entitled to do that. And that has been made clear by everyone concerned. And I think it is important, if I may say so, that we now get on and debate the principles that underline this devolution debate. And I can only say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that if he carries on with points like this, no wonder he's got no MPs in Wales and Scotland left.
Mr. Speaker, is it still the Prime Minister's view that the government annual report is a major innovation to be repeated every year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, perhaps before I answer his question, I should say to him, before I answer his question, perhaps I should say to him that I know this is his last Prime Minister's questions. We wish him well on all sides of the House and good luck in the future. We should all miss his wit and humour. Perhaps not me, since I was the object of most of it, but everyone else, and as I say, we do wish him well in the future. In respect of the annual report, it is important, of course, that we set out what are the achievements and the lack of achievements of the government in whichever year we're in power.
William Higgs. May I thank the Prime Minister for his remarks about me. Debating with him at this dispatch box has been exciting and fascinating and fun and an enormous challenge, and from my point of view, wholly unproductive. It is in every sense. And in fact, I have to say, I'm told that in my time at this dispatch box, I've now asked him 1,118 direct questions. No one has counted the answers, Mr. Speaker. But it may not take very long. But on the question of the annual report, he said, the annual report, he said 4 years ago, is a major innovation. People are entitled to know how we're shaping up. This report is part of that process. We will repeat it each year. Now, the first annual report was called So What Do You Think? The second was called So What Are We Doing? This year seemed to be called So Where Is It? How does he feel about not even keeping his promise to publish a report about keeping his promises?
Well, I confess I never thought he was that keen on our annual reports when we did publish them. But obviously, Mr. Speaker, what we do, of course, is publish all the results of the things that we've done in the year, the things that we haven't done as well. And those are the things that he asked me about in the dispatch box and the over 1,000 questions he's asked me.
Well, where is it? Is really the question. But since he has abandoned the annual report as a way of holding the government to account, what about the traditional way of holding the government to account? What about ministers? What about ministers? Well, honourable members opposite must understand that governments must be held to account between elections as well as at elections. What about ministers taking responsibility? The government's introduction of AS levels have made school children's lives a misery, added to the burden on teachers, led to the extraordinary situation where they can't even guarantee to publish the results on time. Which minister will take responsibility for this?
Speaker, of course we take responsibility, all of us collectively as a government, for the publication of both of results and for the AS levels. But the reason that they were introduced was in order to make sure that children were tested properly throughout their schooling, and that is in common with the system in many other countries. Now, it is of course the case that after they've been introduced, it's important that we look at the way that that is being done, and there may well be lessons that we can learn from that. But I think it would be a big mistake if we ended up saying it wasn't important to test children throughout their schooling and publish the results.
In other words, Mr. Speaker, in other words, no minister will take responsibility. I have to tell him that the AS-level students are told that if they do not offer an adequate attempt to answer the question or complete the task, they are ungraded. And it's a good job he's not doing it. So no annual report, no minister willing to take responsibility. Let's try another form of accountability. The Prime Minister has said he accepts the need for a proper inquiry into the foot and mouth disaster. Does he agree that a proper inquiry must be a public inquiry?
Speaker, I don't agree that it has to be a public tribunal inquiry. No, I don't agree with that. For the reasons given by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, which said that it was sensible in order to produce an inquiry quicker, that we would have a different type of inquiry. We will have that inquiry and we will publish the results of that inquiry. But we have said also, in line again with what the Royal College has said, that it's better to have the inquiry after we have eradicated the disease, which must remain our number one priority. And incidentally, in respect of the AS levels, I didn't say no one would take responsibility. I said we all as a government take responsibility.
Well, for the whole government to resign immediately would be a rather extreme step to take over the AS level. However, maybe a welcome one. So there is no annual report, no minister will take responsibility for a fiasco, and no public inquiry will be held, despite all past precedent, into foot and mouth. Perhaps at least he will agree to accountability to this House. After this week's vote in this House, will he now listen to all sides of the House and adopt the proposals that select committee members should not be appointed by the whips or party managers at all?
Mr. Speaker, I gather the Modernisation Committee this morning decided they will look into this, they will publish a report, and we will consider it very carefully. I simply point out that in the 18 years of the Conservative government, when he was in office, it's funny that all these great designs to reform Parliament never saw the light of day.
Well, for my 1,123rd and final question, and on the same theme, can I ask him, on the theme of accountability, about what he and I know to be the case, that one Prime Minister's questions a week is not an adequate way of holding the Prime Minister of our country to account, that members of this House on all sides should have the opportunity to question the Prime Minister of the day more frequently and on a more sustained basis, and wouldn't that be in the best interest of government, Parliament and public engagement in our political life?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, in respect of holding the government to account, I would just point out to him that, in actual fact, over the 4 years that I've been Prime Minister, I've answered questions for longer in this House than either of my two predecessors and made more statements than either of my two predecessors. And in respect of accountability, of course we as a government are held to account. We are held to account in this House, where again the number of ministerial statements I think has been far in excess of the previous government's record, for example, and we are held to account by the British people. We were held to account by them on June the 7th, and we were returned with this majority as a result of that general election. So we will indeed, Mrs. Whitney, indeed, I hope he's not retiring to the back benches, since I think they're getting rather overcrowded at the moment, but I hope he's not. because I would have thought there is every role for him, for example, as a shadow foreign secretary, because if the Right Honourable Gentleman Rushcliffe were to win, he could come here and tell us about the virtues of the single currency and the rapid reaction force, and alternatively, if the Right Honourable Member for Chingford were elected, he could come here and tell us about what a dreadful idea it was and how the country would have none of it. But in any event, and whatever he does, we wish him well.
Duncan Smith.
As the Prime Minister, associate myself with his comments and warm thoughts about Jamie Cann. Those of us on this side of the House who knew him will have memories of a good colleague and friend, and our thoughts go to his family as well. I also associate myself with the Prime Minister's comments on the brutal assassination today of the Israeli Cabinet Minister. Those who may not even have thought about this should know, as the Prime Minister pointed out, that their determination is to break the peace process, to make sure it cannot go ahead, and it's not the other way round. And so we certainly, like him, will be very concerned about the way that others react to that. But also, over a week ago, when we were talking further about the military action, and a week later, there are those now arguing, it appears, for a pause in the bombing. Well, I fully understand that bin Laden's propaganda and pictures in the media of bombs going astray will worry some. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it is essential that having started this action, we see it through, and that to stop now would send out a terrible message to bin Laden, the Taliban, and any other rogue state bent on terrorism, that they will be allowed to get away with atrocities in the future because we lack the resolve to deal with them?
Mr. Speaker, I do agree with that. I think it is important that we continue this military action and make sure that it is successful. I can tell the House that we have now significantly damaged the Taliban's military capability, including fast jets, transports, helicopters, inflicted very severe damage on their command and control facilities, early warning, air defense systems, radars, surface-to-air missile sites, and we've inflicted heavy damage as well on the terrorist network and terrorist training camps of the Al-Qaeda. We are in the process of establishing the ability to take more further military action against both the Taliban regime and the Al-Qaeda network. And we're also giving additional help to the Northern Alliance and their efforts against the Taliban. The Northern Alliance are now taking territory from the Taliban, are close to Mazar-e-Sharif in the north, and Kabul also. And Mr. Speaker, in any military action, there are difficulties. There is no clean or easy way to deal with it. But I think that the House will know that in the weeks that followed the 11th of September, we made every effort to give the Taliban regime a chance to be reasonable, to yield up. Bin Laden and his associates, they refused to do so. We now know quite clearly from the statements made by Al-Qaeda and Bin Laden since the 11th of September that if they're not stopped, they will try to commit further terrorist atrocities. We have no option but to continue this, to bring it to a successful conclusion, and to close down that terrorist network once and for all.
Ian Duncan Smith. Following that with the Prime Minister, isn't it also correct that ending the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan is clearly linked to the same military success? The biggest obstacle we're now seeing to delivering aid is the control of the vast majority of Afghanistan by the Taliban, who are now, I understand, taxing some of that aid that's going in and even sending some of it to market, not letting it get to those who need it. And as some of the key passes into Afghanistan we know will be closed by the new year, then time, as the Prime Minister knows, is short. So isn't the best way of ensuring that vital aid gets through is for the existing Taliban regime to fall and for a new government to come to power committed to assisting in the aid program?
Speaker, I may again help if I say a word or two about this, because again I understand the concerns of aid agencies and others about humanitarian assistance going through to people inside Afghanistan. Around Afghanistan, on the borders, we have sufficient provision of food, camps, shelter for around about 2.5 million people. There are already some 4 million people being helped. Inside Afghanistan is the problem. The World Food Programme believe that they can get in some 12,000 tons of food in the coming week, even despite the difficulties, and have already got several thousand tons of food in the last few days. However, it is difficult, but it's important people realise why it is difficult. It is difficult because the Taliban regime are harassing the UN convoys, are intimidating them, are in some cases taking over either their equipment or indeed their communications for the sites in which the UN staff are. They are taxing some of the food, so-called taxing as it comes into Afghanistan, and they are trying to lift other parts of it and use it for their own purposes. Now, if we have their cooperation in the humanitarian help to the Afghan people, we can make sure that that food gets through. It is they that are the obstacle, and we will do everything we possibly can, despite their obstruction, to get that food through to people. But it is very important that people realize it is their obstruction that is stopping this food get through to the people that need it.
Ian Duncan-Smith. Well, it is our aim, said the Prime Minister, must be to bring bin Laden, as he has said from the beginning, and Al-Qaeda to justice. But until there is a government in Afghanistan that is determined to rid itself of bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, that, as he knows, will be immensely difficult to achieve. Will the Prime Minister therefore take this opportunity to assure the House that such a government must be broadly based and include not just the mainly Tajik Northern Alliance, but other tribes such as the Pashtuns, Hazaras and others still? And will he also confirm, against some reports, that he and the United States are talking widely to all people who could be or who could help putting such a government together and who may already have plans to do so?
Mr. Speaker, we certainly are talking to all the people that would have to be involved in order to have a broad-based post-Taliban regime in Afghanistan. However, the work that is being carried out here is being undertaken principally by Mr. Brahimi, the UN representative, and he is in talks with all the relevant ethnic groupings in Afghanistan. It is extremely important both that we have a successor to the Taliban regime that has broad support in the country, and that we commit ourselves to assisting that regime in the reconstruction of Afghanistan. And, Mr. Speaker, now some few weeks after the 11th of September, I can assure the House that the coalition for action remains strong. Countries are pledging their support, military as well as logistical support, right round the world. On the humanitarian effort, we are doing everything we reasonably, humanly can, and will do more. And in respect of what happens after the Taliban fall, then we are working to make sure that the Afghan people who are the victims of the Taliban get the best prospect possible of a decent and stable future.
Ian Duncan-Smith. Why does the Prime Minister think that more than a quarter of all family doctors now want to leave the NHS?
Mr. Speaker, I think that there are huge strains on family doctors at the moment, because they are going through a period of enormous change where we're moving the whole of primary care onto primary care trusts. But I think that they believe that primary care trusts are actually the right way forward. I think they also believe, as we will see from the same survey, that the services that they offer to their patients today are actually greatly improved from a few years ago.
Ian Duncan-Smith. Well, if that's the case, then why does the same VMA survey show that 9 out of 10 GPs believe that his reforms are unachievable, and 2/3 think that the Prime Minister's plans will do nothing to improve care for patients? But it's not just the doctors. A constituent of mine recently died. Well, they don't like it, Mr. Speaker. They do not like it. A constituent of mine recently died in hospital after waiting 9 hours on a trolley. His family were not aware that he had been admitted or that he had died for a further 3 days. And when they came to pay their respects, they found that the body had been lost. Does the Prime Minister not think that all his promises of a better tomorrow will sound hollow with people like them?
Mr. Speaker, of course what happened to his constituent is unacceptable. And there are situations in the National Health Service today that are unacceptable. Of course, people wait too long for operations. We don't have enough nurses and doctors and consultants. We need to renovate many hospital buildings and introduce new technology. The point that I would make to him is that all these things require investment and money. And the difference, I'm afraid, between our two political parties is that we support the additional investment going in and his party opposes it.
But it's the usual story. The Prime Minister talks about investment and then, as he did the other day, pleads for more time. But what's the point when his own ministers, some of whom are on the bench here, belie his own words? His health secretary goes round telling everybody that the NHS will remain a state monopoly as long as Labour is in power. Well, they're all nodding because they enjoy that. and a senior cabinet minister is sent to tell the unions that their working practices, no matter what, will not change. So isn't it clear that when it comes to pleas for more time, with Labour it's going to be more wasted time? And isn't it also clear that the truth is they don't like it, but our order, the leader of the opposition must be here. Well, they don't like it, Mr. Speaker. They do not like it. But isn't the truth the Prime Minister has to be aware of, that Labour always puts favours to its friends ahead of fairness to patients?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, in relation to the trade unions, what we want to do is to make sure that when, for example, services are contracted out, they're not done so on the basis of poorer terms and conditions of employment for the staff. And I think one of the things we've learnt over the past few years, not just under this government, under the previous government, is if the impact of contracting out is simply to undermine the terms and conditions of employment of the staff, that usually does not lead to a better service. So I think having discussions on that basis is perfectly sensible. However, in relation to the rest of it, I have to say to them that we are employing more nurses in the health service today, many, many more, many thousands more. There are more doctors and more consultants. We have the largest hospital building programme since the war underway. GP premises are being renovated. Of course, it takes a very long time to do it. It does, and it will do. But it can only be done if we put the necessary investment in. And the position of this party is that it is necessary to put investment in healthcare, education and other public services before short-term tax cuts. It's his position to stand in the opposite corner. And that is why, no matter how much the Conservatives talk about public services, they will never have credibility on them.
Speaker, they should have registered to vote by last Wednesday. Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister said, we learnt overnight of the tragic death last week of Corporal Plank. And our thoughts on this side of the House, as with everybody, are with his family, as once again we are reminded of the extraordinary sacrifices made by our British servicemen and women, to whom I think we all owe a huge debt of gratitude. When I first faced the Prime Minister across the dispatch box, we did discuss the war on terror. The loss of life over the last week has brought that war, I believe, into sharp focus. For there are growing concerns that foreign terrorists, including, it appears, some British citizens, may be operating in Iraq. Can I ask the Prime Minister what information does he have about who is arming, funding and organising these groups, and what further action is being taken to disrupt their activities in Iraq?
Mr. Speaker, perhaps before answering that question, I can say, since I gather this is his last Prime Minister's questions, that whatever our differences, and there have been a few, I wish him well in the future, and so does everyone on this side of the House, and I'm sure he'll come. In respect of Iraq and... Well, we do. In respect of Iraq and terrorism, I mean, I will tell them as much information as we have. There are essentially two groups of people that are conducting these operations, so we believe, in Iraq. One is Saddam supporters, or former members of the regime, and the other is assorted terrorist groups, some of whom have infiltrated Iraq since the coalition forces took control back in May. We are doing everything we possibly can, obviously, to disrupt their activities. But I think the most important thing to remember is that this is not, as it were, the British, American and other coalition forces versus the Iraqi people. This is the coalition forces, the vast majority of the Iraqi people, versus this group of former Saddam people and terrorists. And the truth is, we are trying to make this country better day by day, and their entire purpose is to stop us.
Thank the Prime Minister for his kind words. Obviously, the objective in what the Prime Minister is talking about, to hand power to the Iraqi people as soon as possible. And enormous progress, I think everybody would accept, has been made in difficult circumstances in setting up this Iraqi Governing Council. Does the Prime Minister, however, believe it will be possible to hand over power to a civilian Iraqi government whilst the whereabouts of Saddam Hussein remain unknown?
We do believe that is possible, yes. We think that the biggest inhibition will simply be the progress that we can make. And it's worth just pointing out that in addition to the American forces that are there in Iraq and the 10,000 British forces, there are now 16,000 forces from other countries. I mean, there are several European Union countries providing thousands of people now in Iraq helping with our efforts. And I think the main thing is to recognize that in large parts of Iraq there is fantastic progress being made. I mean, if I could just say to people, for example, the coalition program has cleared over 14,000 kilometers of the 27,000 kilometers of Iraq's canals. We now have today all 22 universities, 43 technical institutes and colleges are open, as are nearly all primary and secondary schools. All 240 hospitals and more than 1,200 clinics are open. The distribution of medicines has risen from almost nothing to a current total of 12,000 tons. And there is a thriving, 6 months ago, satellite dishes were illegal, access to information strictly controlled, difficult for people to use the internet. Today I'm told there are more than 170 newspapers. Which is progress of a sort. And satellite dishes are freely available and widely used, as is the internet. And the point I think to make is this, that there is no inhibition on the progress that we're making, both in political and in economic terms, other than this small group of people who, as we know from our own experience with terrorism, if they're prepared to cause death and mayhem to wholly innocent people, can cause a lot of devastation and inhibit the progress that we're making. But I think the answer is implicit in this question, and I agree with them. The answer is to carry on making the efforts to make Iraq better.
Speaker, the Prime Minister and I have both spoken on a number of occasions about the dangers of rogue states, terrorist groups, and ballistic weapons coming together. I've always agreed that the war on terror would be long, difficult, and that there would be no easy victories. However, I do believe enormous progress has been made. 2 years ago, the Taliban were now being gone from Afghanistan, and Saddam Hussein himself has been removed from power, even though we may not yet know where he is. Does the Prime Minister agree that both in Afghanistan and in Iraq and wherever else we have to fight this war on terror, we must finish this job, the job that we start, or the terrorists at the end of it all will win?
I agree strongly with that, and I thank him for the support that he gave over both the action in Afghanistan and in respect of Iraq as well. And I think people should be very, very clear as to why these terrorist groups are pouring into Iraq at the present time. What they know is that if the coalition forces, together with the United Nations and the international community, if we can make Iraq better, if we can show that the propaganda about us seizing the oil or desiring to destroy the Muslim population, if we can expose that as the propaganda and lies that it is, then of course the signal that will send across the whole of the world, and not least in the Arab world and in the Muslim world, will be enormous, tremendous and positive in its impact. And that is precisely why these people are in Iraq at the moment. They know that this is a battle not just about the future of Iraq, but a battle about whether we can establish a situation where Iraq becomes a prosperous, democratic, stable state, and then acts, if you like, as a beacon to the rest of the world.
John? Ian Duncan Smith? Well, Mr. Speaker, I've asked the Prime Minister this question 18 times. Fat lot of good it's done me, frankly, over the last 2 years. Yeah, absolutely. But I'm going to give it one more try. So why does the Prime Minister persist in denying the British people a chance to vote on a referendum on the European Constitution?
I'm afraid the 19th time of asking won't do much good either, because I have to repeat what I've said before. In my view, because it does not involve a fundamental change between the Member State and the European Union, I do not believe that we should have a referendum on this issue. And I also believe, as I think most people recognise, the real reason the Conservatives want a referendum is to campaign for a no vote as the first step to getting Britain out of Europe.
Speaker, this week his Deputy Prime Minister announced 3 more referendums on regional government. That takes the total of referendums under this government to 37 since 1997. And is the Prime Minister really telling all of us that an elected assembly for Hull, an elected monkey for Hartlepool, are more important than an elected president for Europe?
What I say is that regional government, or indeed the mayor, alters fundamentally the basis upon which people are governed locally. However, I suppose at least he is entitled to ask the question about a referendum, since he wanted a referendum on the Maastricht Treaty. Yes, he did. Some other people sitting quite close to him, however, didn't.
And some other people sitting not too far away from the Prime Minister actually did. So I think he wants to be very careful about that. Now, everyone, Mr. Speaker. Steady, Jack. Now, everyone except the Prime Minister admits openly that this Constitution represents a fundamental change to the way this country is going to be governed. Even his Chancellor, writing in the Daily Telegraph of all papers, warns the Prime Minister about a drift to a federal European state. I must say to the Prime Minister, just between the two of us, I have a sixth sense these days about a leadership challenge bid, I must tell him, so he should watch very carefully. Yeah, the Prime Minister still persists in saying that the Constitution doesn't change anything, it's just a tidying up exercise. So, Mr. Speaker, by common accord, for the last time, that's the reason why nobody believes a word he ever says anymore.
Right. Well, if he's interested in the answer, let me give it to him. Of course, it's true that if, for example, we were to go down the route of tax harmonisation, if tax rates, for example, were to be set by Brussels, if defence was to be run by Brussels, well, that would be a different matter. That would be a fundamental change. But that's not, I'm afraid, that is not what the draft treaty says, and it is certainly not what the outcome of the conference will be. Now, in respect of him saying, however, that nobody other than myself believes that this is an issue that does not fundamentally change the nature of the relationship, I go back to what I said a moment or two ago. The House of Lords European Union Select Committee, with Conservative as well as Labour members on it, said this: it is clear that the balance of power is going to shift from the Commission to Member States. So I have to say, the whole basis upon which he posits the case for a referendum is simply false. So let us wait and see what we get out of the Intergovernmental Conference. But if we do, as I believe we will, protect our tax and defence and foreign policy, there is no case for a referendum other than the true case of the Conservative Party, which is, as I repeat, possibly for more than the 19th time, to get Britain out of Europe.
Mr. Speaker, may I begin by associating myself with the condolences that the Prime Minister has expressed to the victims of both the outrages to which he referred. We send our sincerest sympathy to the families of the victims of those terrible events. 2 weeks ago, the Health Secretary said that he wanted to cut administration costs in his department by a third. Can the Prime Minister tell us by how much those costs have gone up in the last 5 years?
Well, I can tell him that overall in the National Health Service, that the biggest increase that we have, well, first of all, actually, incidentally, sorry. First of all, I should welcome the Right Honourable Gentleman to his new position. And to say how delighted I am that someone written off under the last Conservative government is now given the chance to rehabilitate himself under Labour. As for the staff, yes, it's true, we want to streamline and slim down the number of staff at the centre of the health service, but the biggest thing that we are doing is actually increasing the number of nurses and doctors in the health service. And of course, that is a result of the extra money, the money that he opposed when he had the chance to vote for it a few months ago.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister for his warm words of welcome, but I'm afraid he really didn't answer the question. Let me give him the answer. Administration costs in the Department of Health have actually gone up by a third. So an extra £229 million has been spent on running the Department of Health, and now the Health Secretary tells us it was all a waste of money. Let's try the Treasury. Has anyone told the First Lord of the Treasury how much administration costs there have increased in the last 5 years. Can you give us that figure?
I assume he's already got the answer, but I can tell him what overall government administration costs. Government administration costs actually as a proportion of spending have fallen under this government. But before I come to the Treasury, I would like just to deal with what the extra money in the National Health Service has bought. Because he was saying the other day that all this money has gone in. He was saying it's all gone into administration and none of it has gone into patient care. Well, let me tell him that actually as a result of this extra money, we've increased the number of people allowed into hospital operations by 250,000. We've increased the number of people given primary care. We've increased the number of cancer specialists. We've cut the number of people suffering from heart disease. We've got 24 major new hospitals built, 50,000 nurses, and again, he's opposed every penny piece of it.
Well, Mr. Speaker, 2 questions asked, neither answered. Not a very good start, I'm afraid. The fact is that administration costs at the Treasury have gone up by 52%. And the truth is that since he became Prime Minister, the cost of running government departments, not frontline services, the cost of running government departments has gone up by 50%. That's nearly £7 billion a year. Isn't that eloquent testimony to the ineffectiveness, the ineptitude, and the sheer incompetence of this government, all at the expense of the hard-pressed British taxpayer?
Right. Well, we want to talk about ineptitude and incompetence, do we? Fortunately, we have a record under this Chancellor in charge of the Treasury and under that right honourable gentleman when he was an economics minister in the last Conservative government. So let's compare who is inept, who is incompetent, who wasted money. Under the Conservatives, 15% interest rates when he was an economics minister. When he was employment minister, 1 million extra unemployed. 1 million people in negative equity. £80 billion worth of government debt. Under this Chancellor, the lowest interest rates, inflation and unemployment for decades, 1.5 million more people in work. And let me say one other thing. Whatever this side has done, none of us, when in government, introduced anything as bad as the poll tax. That was what he introduced, as well as giving us the 15% interest rates, as well as opposing the minimum wage. And that's why we say, same old people, same old policy, same old Tories.
Well, let me make it absolutely clear. I'm very happy to debate the past with the Prime Minister any day he likes. Any day he likes. I've got a great big dossier on his past. I've got a great big dossier on his past, and I haven't even had to sex it up. We can talk about his personal pledge to leave the European Union. We can talk about the time that he criticized America's state-sponsored terrorism. I wonder if he'll be raising that with President Bush next week. Or we can talk about the time that he praised the fortitude and resolve of the Wapping strikers. I bet he doesn't remind Rupert Murdoch of that. I'm very happy to debate the past with him any day of the week. But I rather think that the British people are more interested in today and tomorrow than in yesterday. And we will take every opportunity to remind them of the failures today of his discredited government.
I'm very happy to debate today with them as well. Let's look, for example, at his own constituency and what has happened today. Yes, I think so. In his constituency, 11 schools have benefited from the New Deal for Schools funding that he's pledged to scrap. The number of 5, 6 and 7-year-olds in class of over 30 has fallen from 12,000 to 249. We've had the best results for primary schools, GCSE, A-levels that we've ever had. All the waiting times are down. Yes. And that is precisely the difference, that this party is putting money into our public services, getting results in every constituency in the country, and what we know from him is that he doesn't simply represent the past, he would take us back to the past.
Adrian Bailey, Michael Howard.
Why was it necessary for his spokesman to say yesterday that the relationship between the Prime Minister and the Chancellor continues to be one of the great strengths of the government?
Probably. Probably because he was asked the question.
Well, if the answer's true, why was that legendary peacemaker, the Deputy Prime Minister, brought in to mediate between them? Isn't it an absolute disgrace that while the people of this country feel so let down over schools, over hospitals and over crime, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer spend their time squabbling over who should sit on the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party?
Isn't it extraordinary that the right honourable gentleman, with the record he had when in government, actually turns round and attempts to say that people in this country are suffering today under the Chancellor? Well, what if they're suffering under the Chancellor? What was it like when we had 1 million people repossessed through negative equity? Right? What was it like when we had 1 million extra unemployed when he was the Employment Secretary? What do they think it was like when people had 15% interest rates? And what we had a moment or two ago, Mr. Speaker, when you, of course, quite rightly disallowed the question from my honourable friend, it was interesting the reaction on the benches opposite to any discussion of their patients' passport policy. Because if we're talking about the National Health Service, what would be a disaster for people in the health service today is to be forced to top up their treatment with a voucher that would cost thousands of pounds for basic health care, that would mean that ordinary people in the health service didn't get that care. And I tell them this, it's not just his record in government we're going to be discussing, it's his policies now, because those policies are just the same as the policies that brought disaster before.
Mr. Speaker, I know that retirement will be on both our minds today. When the Prime Minister's former Chief Economic Advisor said last month the government has no long-term strategy on pensions and that the Chancellor was leaving pensions policy in a complete shambles, does the Prime Minister think he was referring to the £5 billion a year pension tax, the spread of means testing, or the Chancellor's plan to sabotage Lord Turner's report, which at least tries to do something about the problems the Chancellor's created?
Well, first of all, let me tell him what he can expect in retirement thanks to this government. There is the winter fuel payment. There is the council tax rebate. There is the reduced VAT on fuel. There are the restored free eye tests. Once he's over 75, free TV licenses. £11 billion a year more spending on pensioners. That's a record we can be proud of.
Well, it's such an enticing prospect, Mr. Speaker, that I expect the Prime Minister will want to join me very shortly. Isn't the problem, though, that the only retirement the Chancellor is planning for is the Prime Minister's? The truth is The truth is that under this government, over 10,000 occupational pension schemes have collapsed, and the amount of money people save has almost halved. Doesn't the Prime Minister see that there's a growing consensus that in order to deal with this mess, we've got to ditch the Chancellor's obsession with means testing? That's our view. It's the view of the pensioners' groups and the industry. It's the view of Lord Turner. And we know it's the view of the Prime Minister himself, because he once said, we can end means testing for pensioners once and for all. So will the Prime Minister now, just for once, stand up to his Chancellor and, with our support, do what needs to be done to sort out one of the greatest challenges the country faces?
He'll also have seen that Adair Turner made mention of the fact that thanks to the pension credits and the minimum income guarantee, we have lifted nearly 2 million pensioners out of hardship and poverty. And of course we need to secure a pension provision for the long term. We will do that. But let us be in no doubt at all that it is as a result of this government and the means that we have used to lift pensioners out of poverty that has allowed us, for the first time, to go through winter periods with pensioners no longer forced to choose between the heating they need to stay alive and the standard of living that they want. And therefore, let me say to the right honourable gentleman, we will take no lessons in pension provision from the party that was responsible for pension mis-selling and left millions of pensioners in poverty in 1997.
Returning, Mr. Speaker, to the issue of retirement. Everyone knows that this is my last appearance at this dispatch box. What they want to know is how many more appearances the Prime Minister is going to make at that dispatch box. Will he confirm today that it is still his intention to serve a full third term?
I repeat all the things that I said before the election and indeed subsequent to the election. But can I say, since the right honourable gentleman is taking his leave of us today, that we on this side wish him well.
Well, I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for those good wishes. But they won't have deflected anyone's attention from the fact that he refused to confirm today whether he's going to serve a full term. Now, why is he being so coy? Surely this is something we're entitled to know. Everybody knows I'm going next week. They want to know when he's going. Why won't he tell us? Is his coyness due to the fact that he's been listening to his Environment Secretary, who said at the weekend that he should give his successor a decent chance to settle in and make his own mark? So a simple yes or no will do. Will he serve a full term?
I've answered that before, and I answer it in the same way again now. But let me just say this to the right honourable gentleman. That I entirely understand why he wishes to see my retirement, but I have to say to him that he is the fourth Conservative leader I have faced. Next week, I will face the fifth. But I have to say one other thing to honourable members opposite, that if you look at all the previous Conservative leaders I've faced, the first one was Conservative leader for 6 years, the second one for 4 years, the third one for 2 years, 1 month and 16 days, and he's lasted just 2 years and 1 month. So I don't know that that's a very good basis for the next one to start.
Well, the Prime Minister is ending just exactly as he started 2 years and 1 month ago, by refusing to answer any of the questions that I'm putting to him. But everyone knows that retirement is a time for reflection. When the Prime Minister said of the party behind him, I have taken from my party everything they thought they believed in. I've stripped them of their core beliefs. What keeps it together is power. When he said all that, did he realise he'd end up needing their votes?
Well, let me tell him what we have done in this 8 years of government. Let me tell him what we have done in this 8 years of government.
What we've done is deliver the strongest economy in the G7. Well, this is what politics is about, not the points he's making. It's about delivering for the people of this country. Record levels of employment, youth unemployment down, ordinary unemployment down, record investment in the National Health Service and education, record numbers of police officers. How does that compare with his record? When he was Employment Secretary, unemployment rose by 1 million. When he was Home Secretary, they cut police numbers by 1,000. And when he was leader of his party, he lost the only election he fought.
2 years ago, Mr. Speaker, I held up a dossier called Blair His Past. Today I've got one called Blair His Legacy. It shows taxes up, crime up, MRSA up, truancy up, means testing up, borrowing up, savings down, productivity growth down, competitiveness down, manufacturing employment down, crime clear-up rates down, numbers of servicemen and women down, and reform blocked. That's the Prime Minister's legacy. But I have just one last question, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister once said, "My project will be complete when the Labour Party learns to love Peter Mandelson." Can he give us a progress report on that?
Well, I think I may have to say on that one, a lot done, a lot left to do. However, there is one simple test, I'm afraid, in politics of whether one succeeds or fails, and that is based on putting your case to the British people. And the British people elected this party in 1997. They elected it again in 2001. They elected it again in 2005. And I have no doubt, given the current state of the Conservative Party, they'll elect it again when that next election comes.
David Cameron.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first issue that the Prime Minister and I are going to have to work together on is getting the good bits of his education reforms through the House of Commons and into law. That's the problem with these exchanges. The chief whip on the Labour side shouting like a child. Has she finished? Have you finished? Right. We both agree that schools with greater freedom produce the best results. Will he confirm that all of the freedoms for schools in the White Paper will survive into the bill?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it is important that we give schools the freedoms that they need, and I'm delighted to hear that he supports these reforms. I assume, therefore, the Conservative Party will be voting for them.
Absolutely. With our support, with our support, the Prime Minister knows there is no danger of losing these education reforms in a parliamentary vote. So he can afford to be as bold as he wants to be. That's when he's at his best. Now, or so I'm told. Now, can we agree that that means trust schools, owning their own buildings and land, employing their own staff, setting pay locally, developing their own culture and ethos, and controlling their own admissions?
Of course, it means all those powers that presently are available to foundation and voluntary aided schools being extended to other schools as well. That's the purpose of the proposals. Incidentally, I should have, before I answered any question, welcomed him to his new position and congratulated him on winning the Conservative leadership election. But can I tell him where I feel we may
and I'm sorry to say this, have a disagreement. And that is, as I understand it, his position, though, is to say that all schools should be free to set their own admissions procedures. I'm afraid I believe the present admissions code should remain in place. So perhaps we could just clear up that too.
Come on. I want schools to control their own admissions. That's what's in the white paper, and let's see it turns into the bill. Now, it's only our first exchange, and already the Prime Minister is asking me the questions. This approach is stuck in the past, and I want to talk about the future. He was the future once. Education is one of the public services in desperate need of reform. So will you agree with me that our aim should be to make sure that all schools have these freedoms? Will the Prime Minister ensure that this is one reform where he won't look back and wish he had gone further?
Well, I certainly can say, as I said before, that it's important that all schools get these freedoms. However, it is obvious that we disagree on the issue of admissions. I think that if schools are free to bring back selection at the age of 11, that would be regressive for our country. And so I'm afraid in this brand new consensus we have to disagree on that point. The other point, though, that I think is very important is this. We've also got to keep the investment going in our schools. Now, as he knows, the Conservative Party voted against that investment. But I have to say it's that as a result of the investment and the change through specialist schools and city academies and the literacy and numeracy strategy, we've now got the best ever results at 11, at 16, at 18 in our schools. And therefore I have to say to him that it's not merely in respect of education policy we've got to agree, we've also got to agree that the investment that is so necessary to back up that reform continues. And I'm afraid his economic policy, which is actually to cut back investment because of his desire, yes. Well, I'm happy if this is another policy he's about to change, but he is saying that this year he would not have put all the investment in, but rather have shared that investment half and half between tax cuts and investment. As a result of that, that would mean substantial cuts in public investment. And therefore, I'm very happy to have this new consensus with him, and I'm delighted that today he said the Conservative Party will vote for these education reforms, but it has to be on the basis, I'm afraid, of agreeing the investment also.
David Cameron. The Montreal Climate Change Conference is taking place this week. We support the goal of a new Kyoto-style treaty which will tackle carbon emissions. Earlier this year, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, he has been changing his thinking on this issue. Can he set out his new thinking, and in particular, is he still committed to a proper successor to Kyoto based on clear targets, including all the major carbon-producing countries of the world?
Yes, I certainly am committed to that. And the reason why I think it is important that we change our thinking on this is that I don't believe that the successor to Kyoto can work unless it has not just the United States involved in such targets and such a framework, but also India and China, because they are the major emerging economies of the world. In China, for example, at the moment they're building somewhere in the region, I think it's one power station every week or every 2 weeks. And therefore, unless we manage to get a comprehensive framework that also involves India and China, then it won't be of much use to us. And so I entirely agree that it is an immensely important issue. That's one of the reasons, of course, why we passed the climate change levy. And I hope this now indicates also that he will support us on this too.
I'm grateful for the Prime Minister's answer. His Environment Secretary said in advance of Montreal, and I quote, without mechanisms in the form of compulsory action, such as targets to cut emissions, existing and new technologies will never be rolled out on a scale necessary, and I agree with that. Now, the Prime Minister said last month that people get, and I quote, very nervous and very worried about this approach, and that we need better and more sensitive set of mechanisms. Can the Prime Minister confirm absolutely that he still genuinely agrees with what his Environment Secretary has said?
I just said in answer to the first question that it is important that we got binding targets. I do actually believe, because emerging economies will want those to be sensitive to the needs of their economic growth, that one of the important issues that wasn't part of Kyoto but needs to be part of the new protocol is technology transfer. Because as we develop the research that allows us to have clean energy, we need to share that research and share that technology with others. But I do come, sorry, I'm pointing my finger there. Wouldn't want that to break up the new consensus. But I do have to say to him that it is important not merely that we say how much we care about climate change, but that we take the action necessary. And therefore, I have to say to him that it will be no use his saying he supports this unless he also supports the climate change levy and the renewables obligation and the extra investment we put in energy efficiency. But if he's prepared to have a consensus on that basis, I welcome it.
David Cameron. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to Major Paul Harding, Corporal John Rigby, and drummer Thomas Wright, who died serving their country in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think the Prime Minister was absolutely right to put on record, once again, the huge debt that we all owe to our armed forces. Their professionalism, their courage, their heroism is a constant source of inspiration and pride throughout our country. Before I wish the Prime Minister well for the future, I would like to ask some questions about the floods in Britain and the situation in the Middle East. On the floods, 4 people have lost their lives, thousands of homes have been flooded, many people are in temporary accommodation. Emergency services are clearly doing an incredible job. Will the government ensure they have all the support they need and that the local authorities under the greatest pressure get all that they require?
First of all, in respect of the flooding, it has, as he rightly says, meant that 4 lives have been lost. I think we should all send our condolences and sympathy to the families of those that have lost their lives. And in respect of what we now have to do, I mean, we have increased the amount of money for our coastal defence protection to somewhere in the region, I think, of £600 million a year now. We are doing an immense amount for the future to make sure that we have proper provision in place. I'm afraid it is something where we're going to have to spend a lot more money and invest a lot more in the years to come. But in addition to that, of course, under the Bellwin scheme, it will be open to the local authorities to get reimbursed for the additional costs that they've got, and I know that these requests will be looked at sympathetically. It is a very difficult situation. There are thousands of properties that have been affected, and I'm afraid hundreds of millions of pounds worth of damage that has been caused. But we will, of course, do everything we can in conjunction with the Environment Agency and the local authorities to try and improve the situation.
I'm grateful for that answer. Yesterday, the Environment Secretary rightly praised the work of the RAF. He said that armed forces liaison officers were ready to provide support if necessary, but otherwise there was no need for any further army deployment. Can the Prime Minister assure us that if necessary, that decision can be changed and that military resources can be deployed?
Well, we will, of course, keep that decision under review, and any further resources that are necessary we will put in. It is worth pointing out, and he's right to do so, that not merely have our armed forces, in this case the RAF, played a very important role for which we thank them, but also the emergency services as a whole have responded to this crisis in the most exemplary manner, as indeed they always do.
Chairman. Thank you. Can I turn to an issue that might be relevant to the Prime Minister's future? Clearly, this is a very difficult time in the Middle East, with the desperate situation in the Gaza Strip and instability in the West Bank, all against the backdrop of a Palestinian economy that has failed to develop. Can the Prime Minister tell us what his first priority will be if and when he takes on this new role?
The absolute priority is to try to give effect to what is now the consensus across the international community, that the only way of bringing stability and peace to the Middle East is a two-state solution, which means a state of Israel that is secure and confident of its security, and a Palestinian state that is not merely viable in terms of its territory, but in terms of its institutions and governance. I believe it is possible to do that, but it will require a huge intensity of focus and work.
David Cameron. when it comes to the Palestinian territories, clearly on everyone's mind in this country is the fact that Alan Johnston is still in captivity. All of us who saw that chilling video will feel enormous sympathy for him, for his family, for his colleagues. His continued captivity is utterly senseless and serves no cause. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that as many Palestinians have demonstrated in the territories and actually here in Britain that their interests can best be served if he is released immediately?
Well, I should say, in respect of Alan Johnson, we deeply regret the fact of his continued imprisonment, and we are working closely with the BBC and with the Palestinian Authority to do everything we can to secure his release. And it is absolutely right. I'm sure the majority of Palestinian people want to see him released. And I think it is worth simply pointing out as well, I mean, he was a journalist doing a job as a journalist. It is completely without any justification at all to take him as a target for any action of whatever nature. And I would also simply point out that I believe for the majority of Palestinian and Israeli people, they want to see a situation where hostage-taking and violence is a thing of the past and the two groups of people can live together in peace.
Thank you. On behalf of everyone on these benches, can I congratulate him on his remarkable achievement of being Prime Minister for 10 years. For all of the heated battles across this dispatch box, for 13 years he has led his party, for 10 years he has led our country, and no one can be in any doubt in terms of the huge efforts he has made in terms of public service. He has considerable achievements to his credit, whether it is peace in Northern Ireland, whether it is his work in the developing world, which I know will endure. I'm sure that life in the public eye has sometimes been tough on his family. So can I say on behalf of my party that we wish him and his family well, and we wish him every success in whatever he does in the future.
Let me thank him for those very generous sentiments. And may I say that for all the political disagreements between us, I think it is always important to be able to work with people on issues of national importance across the political divide, and I've always found him most proper, correct and courteous in his dealings with me, and I thank him for that. And although, of course, I cannot wish him well politically, nonetheless, personally, I wish both him and his family very well indeed.
First of all, I agree with the Prime Minister about Alan Johnson. It is fantastic news that he's on his way back to his family. Recent attempts to cause massive loss of life in London and in Glasgow remind us of the very real threat that we face in this country. There are a number of measures that we believe would make a difference. First, we support the use of telephone tap evidence in court, so we don't just catch these people, we convict them and lock them up. 6 weeks ago, the government agreed to our proposal for a Privy Council review of this issue. Can the Prime Minister tell us how soon it will publish the names, when will this meet, and when will it report?
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman. I hope that right across the House, as right across the country, there can be unity in our determination to fight terrorism. And I want to remind people just how brave and courageous were the explosive experts in London, and were those people who tackled the terrorist activity that happened at Glasgow Airport. And I hope that we can continue on an all-party basis to agree measures that are necessary in this country to deal with the terrorist threat. On the specific question of intercept, I can tell him that we will go ahead with our investigation, carried out on Privy Council terms, and of course I will consult him and the leader of the Liberal Party on the names of the people that will conduct that investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I hope we can make progress. It is a complicated issue, but it isn't complicated setting up a committee, and that should happen without any delay. Second, we need to act against groups which are seeking to radicalise young people. Almost 2 years ago, the government said that it would ban the extremist group Hizb ut-Tahrir. We think it should be banned. Why hasn't it happened?
Of course, in all these details, and I have had to deal with this at the Treasury when we're dealing with terrorist finance, you have to have evidence to do so. And it's precisely to examine the evidence that we instruct a number of investigations. Let me tell them what we will do. We'll expand the watch list, which is the cooperation right across the world, from Europe to the Arab states, of potential terrorists, so that we list them in such a way that authorities in different countries can be warned. We'll expand the background checks that are being done where there are highly skilled migrant workers coming into this country, where people sponsor them. We will ask them to give us their background checks. Thirdly, as a result of what has happened in the National Health Service, I've asked Lord West, the new terrorism minister, to conduct an immediate review as to what arrangements we must make in relation to recruitment to the NHS because of what we know has happened over the last few days. And finally, of course, we will want to sign new agreements with other countries around the world so that we act together to deal with the potential terrorist threat, and we are able to deport people to countries where they should be rather than in this country. And I hope, again, that there can be all-party agreement for the measures, yes, for the measures that we are taking to ensure both the security of British citizens and to work with other countries in the fight against terror.
Thank you. I mean, very interesting answer, but I asked a very specific question. The Prime Minister said we need evidence about Hizb ut-Tahrir. This organisation says, and I quote, Jews should be killed wherever they are found. What more evidence do we need before we ban this organisation? It is poisoning the minds of young people. 2 years ago, the government said it should be banned. I asked again, when will this be done?
Yeah, we can ban it under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and of course, I think the Leader of the Opposition forgets I've been in this job for 5 days. I think let the Prime Minister answer. Let the Prime Minister. I have agreed that we will look at this issue, but we need evidence, and the evidence can't be just one or two quotes. What we must do is look in detail at the evidence, and I hope he will agree with me that we approach these things in a sustained way and in a calm way, and we do not jump to conclusions. We look at all the evidence, and that is the basis, Mr. Speaker, on which this government will proceed.
But there have been 2 years of a lapse since the government said it would ban this organisation. I think people find it hard to understand why an organisation that urges people to kill Jews hasn't been banned. Now, as well as preventing radicalisation and stopping future dangers, we need to protect ourselves against present dangers. Does the Prime Minister agree that the time has now come for a national border police force?
Well, I am prepared to look at this, and I have, of course, when I've been Chancellor of the Exchequer, looked at how the Customs and Excise authorities can work better with the police to secure border arrangements. But I have to say to him that everybody who looks at this issue, including Lord Stevens, who looked at this issue for him, has concluded that complementary to a border police force is the need for identity cards. And it is his party that continues... it is his party that continues to oppose identity cards. And I may say that the new terrorism shadow minister that he has appointed only a few days ago, Lady Neville-Jones, has also said that complementary to the other measures that are necessary to protect our borders are identity cards. And I hope again, in the spirit of bipartisan cooperation, that he'll reconsider his views on the need to introduce identity cards.
If he wants to trade quotes on identity cards, perhaps he'll try this one from his Chancellor of the Exchequer. Identity cards are unnecessary and will create more difficulties than they will solve. I do not want my whole life to be reduced to a magnetic strip on a plastic card. Identity cards did not stop the Madrid bombings. After the 7th of July bombings, the then Home Secretary said they wouldn't have helped in the UK. They wouldn't come in for years. They'd cost billions of pounds, money that should be spent on things like a border police. Now let me come back again on the border police. The Home Affairs Select Committee supported a border police. The current Metropolitan Police Commissioner supports a border police. And Lord Stevens, as he said, is conducting a review for us now on the need for a border police, which he fully supports. The Prime Minister said he's open to this suggestion. Will he tell us exactly what he will do and when he'll make an announcement about a national border police force?
Well, first of all, I may say to him that comments that are made about identity cards in the past have got to take into account what is actually happening now. And it is because the situation has changed that more and more people have come to the view that is taken by his security expert and taken by Lord Stevens that we need identity cards. And I know that there are many people on the Conservative backbenches who believe exactly the same as we do. As for the border police, I've said I will look at this issue. We have brought Customs and Excise and the other authorities together to work in closer cooperation already. I have to look at that in the context of the finance that is available and in the context of other measures that we are taking, including electronic borders, to step up security, that I can assure him that this government will ensure that the security of the British people is protected, and we will take all measures that are necessary for the safety of the British people. And again, I hope, Mr. Speaker, that there will be bipartisan cooperation on these issues so that we can show the world that Britain is protected against terrorism.
Jim Sheridan, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Gentleman, very Honourable Gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Convicting terrorists by using phone taps, banning the extremists that radicalise young people in our country, and vitally securing our borders, aren't these three of the practical steps that are absolutely vital parts of the unity that the Prime Minister needs to build so that we can all ensure the terrorists will never win?
And I have to say to him that we can cooperate on the issues ahead, but he has got to look at the policies that he has been putting forward and examine whether these are the right things for this time as well. And I also have to make a point to him that unfunded change is no change at all. If he is not prepared to support with financial resources the policing, the law and order, and all the public services that are necessary, then we will not be able to agree on the way forward. Mr. Speaker, in the light of the events of the last few days, I do hope that the country can come together and agree these measures. I've offered conversations with him on a number of issues, including the intercept, and on other issues we are prepared to cooperate not only with the Leader of the Opposition, but with the other parties. It is vitally important that the message is sent out to the rest of the world that we will stand strong, steadfast and united in the face of terror.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to Guardsman Michael Sweeney and to Rifleman Mark Turner, who've been killed in Afghanistan in the last week. 280 British servicemen and women and MOD civilians have now lost their lives while serving in Afghanistan. And as we prepare for the end of this Parliament, we should remember the sacrifice that they and their families have made and acknowledge the huge debt that we all owe to our armed forces for the bravery that they show day after day. I also join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to James Shears and Alan Bannon, the two firefighters killed while tackling the fire in Southampton last night. As Mr. Speaker, this is the last Prime Minister's questions this Parliament. It is the last chance for this Prime Minister to show that he is accountable for the decisions he has made. Will he start by admitting that when British forces were sent into Helmand, they did not have sufficient helicopters to protect themselves and get the job done?
Mr. Speaker, I do not accept that in any operation to which we sent our troops, that our commanding officers gave wrong advice and told us that we should, told us they were properly equipped. At every time, in every operation, we ask our commanding officers, are we able to do this operation? And our commanding officers have said, yes, they can. So I have to say to him that we have done our best to equip our troops and we will continue to do so. It is right that I take full responsibility, but I take the advice of our commanding officers, and advice of our commanding officers is very clear.
David Cameron, say that answer sums up this premiership. Takes no responsibility and always blames somebody else. Why can't he just admit something that everybody knows to be true? There weren't enough helicopters. Let's listen to Colonel Stuart Tootle, former commander of 3 Para. He said this: repeated demands for more helicopters fell on deaf ears. It increased risks for my paratroopers. But as he put it, the decision makers, yes, the ministers, they weren't the ones driving into combat when they should have been flying into combat. And the Foreign Office Minister that he appointed, Lord Malloch Brown, said as late as last year, and I quote, "We definitely don't have enough helicopters." Presumably the Prime Minister is going to tell us all these people were just deceived.
Mr. Speaker, we have increased the number of helicopters in Afghanistan. We've increased the flying time by more than 100%. I think he should recognise that the Merlins were adapted so that they are now in Afghanistan. He should also recognise that the Chinooks were also adapted so that they too can be in Afghanistan. He should recognise that we have other helicopters in Afghanistan that are working, and we are part of an international operation in Afghanistan where we share equipment with our coalition partners. And I have to say to him, the amount of money spent in Afghanistan now is £5 billion a year. That is 1,000 extra vehicles. That is twice the number of flying time hours for our helicopters. And I think he should accept that our troops, for the operations that they are asked to undertake, have been given the equipment they need. That is the right position.
David Cameron. Again, no answer. And I have to ask you this. Why?
Order. Government backbenchers must calm down. Mr. David Cameron.
And why should anyone believe this Prime Minister when he was the first in history to go in front of a public inquiry and not give accurate information about defence spending? So let me ask about another decision for which this Prime Minister ought to be accountable. In the last 13 years, he has robbed pension funds of £100 billion. His own welfare minister said this: when Labour came to office, we had one of the strongest pension provisions in Europe, and now we probably have some of the weakest. Presumably he was deceived as well. Will the Prime Minister finally admit that robbing the pension funds was the wrong decision for Britain?
When he said there was no answer to the last question, it is him that is never given an answer on any single policy. And Mr. Speaker, as far as pension funds are concerned, we debated in this House 2 years ago, and the Shadow Chancellor put up the case that the dividend tax credit had affected the ability of pension funds to have money. I showed at that time that during the period before the stock market crash, what had actually happened was the resources of the pension funds had doubled. He lost his case when he put it to the House of Commons. It's no use trying to put it again. What we have done over these last 12 years, a pensioners' winter allowance initially opposed by the Conservative Party. What we are saying we will do is link pensions to earnings taken away by a Conservative government. What we have done is taken 2 million pensioners with a pension tax credit and given them dignity in retirement, again opposed by the Conservative government. And what we now have is a national concessionary fare scheme which give pensioners the chance to travel the country at risk under a Conservative government.
That, Mr. Speaker, is the sort of deception we're going to rebut in this election campaign every time. And he must be the only person in Britain who thinks robbing pension funds was a good idea. This is what his own advisor, who sat in number 10 Downing Street, said. This Prime Minister will go down in history as the one who destroyed our pension system. He just ignores what he doesn't want to hear, then he tries to cover up the consequences. People are finally starting to rumble Gordon Brown, and it serves him right. Presumably she was deceived as well. Let's take another decision for which the Prime Minister needs to be held to account. Yes?
Order. Honourable and right honourable members are shouting themselves hoarse before we've even got to the hustings. Members must calm down. Mr. David Cameron.
They were shouting out about national insurance contributions, and this is a question about national insurance contributions. The Prime Minister has made the decision to introduce a jobs tax which will kill the recovery. Now, this morning on GMTV, he said that business leaders who oppose this decision have been deceived. Is the Prime Minister really telling us that he knows more about job creation than business leaders who employ almost 1 million people in this country?
Mr. Speaker, once again, I have to tell him about what happened during this recession and what we had to do to take this country out of recession. We had to nationalise Northern Rock, and they opposed it. We had to restructure the banks. Business supported us, but they opposed it. We had to take action to secure help for the unemployed. Businesses support the Future Jobs Fund. They opposed it. We had to take action to help homeowners. Business supported it. They opposed it. And we had to take action to help small business itself. And they opposed the funds that were necessary. Now, as far as national insurance is concerned, there is a choice. There is a clear choice. We can put the national insurance up and therefore protect our schools, our hospitals and our policing. Or we can do what the Conservatives traditionally do, and that's put our hospitals, police and our health service at risk.
The choice is Labour's decision to go on wasting money and then put up tax on every job in the country. These business leaders, this is what they said. Cutting government waste won't endanger the recovery, but putting up national insurance will. Now let me ask him again. Does he believe that these business leaders, including members of his own advisory council, does he believe they were deceived?
Mr. Speaker, we cannot cut our way to recovery, and that's why to withdraw £6 billion from the economy now is the wrong thing to do. And let us be clear, the Conservative policies would put jobs at risk immediately, would put businesses at risk immediately, and would put growth at risk immediately. As far as 2011 is concerned, we've got to make a decision. Do we want to maintain the improvement in our policing, our public services, our health service guarantees, and maintain investment in the schools? We say that that will cost that extra money on national insurance. They say no. Public must make up their mind. Do they want the public services to be maintained, or do they want the traditional Tory policy of putting our public services at risk?
This morning, the Prime Minister said these business leaders had been deceived. Since then, another 30 business leaders have come again and said, oh, they're right and they're wrong. And let me tell him, let me just read the Prime Minister what they're saying. Paul Walsh, the head of Diageo, on the Prime Minister's Business Council. No, not a Tory, one of his advisors. Well, he's probably a Tory now, so are half the country. Let's hear what he had to say. It is not true to claim businesses have been deceived. National insurance is a tax on jobs. Let's hear from John Egan, former head of BAA. How can there be a deception? National insurance is a tax on jobs, pure and simple. Isn't the truth this? This Prime Minister would wreck the recovery by putting a tax on every job, on everyone earning over 20,000, a tax on aspiration, a tax on every business on the country. This government would wreck the recovery.
Mr. Speaker, it's the same old Conservative Party. Order.
Members must calm themselves. There are several weeks to go. The Leader of the Opposition was heard, and the Prime Minister will now be heard. Prime Minister.
Once again, he said nothing about the future. It's the same old Tories, Mr. Speaker, to think he was the future once. Mr. Speaker, the shortest ever waiting list in the health service. Mr. Speaker, 2.5 million more jobs since 1997. A sure start in every community in our country. More pupils are staying on at school than ever. More students going to university. More pensioners out of poverty. More dignity and security in retirement. And we are the government that has planned for the future. They have nothing to offer. Only a Labour government can do it.
Harriet Harman.
Mr. Speaker, can I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to Corporal Stephen Curley and Marine Scott Taylor from 40 Commando Royal Marines, and to Gunner Zach Cusack from 4th Regiment Royal Artillery. As the Prime Minister said, they were brave men who died in the service of our country. We must never forget the sacrifice they made. And can I strongly support what the Prime Minister has said about the dreadful shootings in Cumbria? We offer our deepest sympathies to the families of those who've been killed and our strong support for the police, the emergency services and the local communities in Cumbria. Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Prime Minister about the Israeli interception of the Gaza flotilla? I'm sure he agrees that this is a tragic loss of life which has angered the Palestinians and dismayed friends of Israel too. Can he tell the House what is the current position of the British nationals who've been detained by the Israelis? And will he tell us how the government can contribute to international efforts to make the Israelis recognise that the blockade of Gaza is prolonging the suffering of the Palestinians and making peace in the Middle East even harder to achieve? This blockade must end.
Can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for what she said about our troops, and also for raising the issue of these events off the coast of Gaza. I mean, what has happened is completely unacceptable. We should be clear about that, and we should also deplore the loss of life, and indeed I've spoken to the Prime Minister of Turkey to extend our condolences for the Turkish citizens who've been lost. We should do everything we can to make sure this doesn't happen again, and I stressed this point in a conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel. In terms of our specific questions, in terms of British nationals, there are 42 British nationals caught up in this. I believe that around 37 of them have had consular access, and that all of them will be coming home, and we need to make sure they are reunited with their families as fast as possible. She also raised the issue of international efforts to get the blockade open. As she knows, and as the Shadow Foreign Secretary will know, we should do everything we can through the United Nations, where Resolution 1860 is absolutely clear about the need to end the blockade and to open up Gaza. And what I would say, in addition, is this, that friends of Israel, and I count myself a friend of Israel, should be saying to the Israelis that the blockade actually strengthens Hamas's grip on the economy and on Gaza, and it's in their own interest to lift it, and to allow these vital supplies to get through. Harriet Harman.
I thank him for that answer, and I know we'll be hearing further from the Foreign Secretary in a statement immediately after these questions. Can he give me an answer to another important issue, one that I raised with him last Tuesday, about prosecuting rape? We know that it's often only after many rapes that a defendant is finally brought to court, and it's only at that point, often, when previous victims find the courage to come forward. By making rape defendants anonymous, he's going to make it harder to bring rapists to justice.
Well, I know the Right Honourable Lady cares very deeply about this issue, as do I, and the fact that rape convictions are so low in this country is a scandal, and we need to improve on that. That means working with the police and also doing more to help rape victims, including backing rape crisis centres. On the issue of anonymity, I sat on the Home Affairs Select Committee that examined this issue. It was, of course, a committee in the last Parliament dominated by Labour members, very ably chaired by Chris Mullin. We came to the conclusion that there was a case for saying that between arrest and charge there was a case for anonymity. The coalition agreement mentions this issue of anonymity, and we will of course be bringing forward proposals which the House can then examine and debate. But I think there is a case for this to happen. But I understand what she says, that it is important that the publicity around a case can help bring other people who have been raped forward. So I understand her case, but I think this does represent a good way forward. Harriet Harman.
Well, I welcome his recognition of that first point, but doesn't he also recognise that to single out rape, which is what he's proposing to do, to single out rape defendants sends a very powerful message to juries in rape cases that the rape victim is not to be believed, and it sends a devastating message to rape victims that uniquely of all victims they are not to be believed.
Well, I don't accept that. I mean, the Home Affairs Select Committee looked at this very carefully and came to the conclusion that in this case there was a case for extending anonymity. Also because in rape cases, obviously those that have been raped have anonymity themselves, and that was the case with this limited extension. But we will be bringing forward proposals that can be debated and discussed in the House of Commons. We all want the same thing, which is to increase the number of successful rape prosecutions and to send more rapists to jail. That's what this is about. Harriet Harman.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, but I think that is a disappointing answer because he shows no understanding of the progress that's been made on prosecuting rape, and he doesn't realise how seriously this will turn the clock back. Can I turn to another area where I believe the government should reconsider, and that's the married man's tax allowance. It would only go to 1 in 3 married couples. It would cost £500 million a year. Can you tell the House how that would contribute to cutting the deficit?
Well, I'm an unashamed supporter of families and supporters of marriage. And I simply don't understand why so many other European countries, and I often remember being lectured from the other side of the House about how we should follow European examples, so many other European countries recognise marriage in the tax system, and yet we don't. So this is an issue I believe we should bring forward. Proposals to recognise marriage in the tax system. It's proposals that in our happy coalition they will have the right to abstain on, I'm happy to say. But I support marriage, and I say we support so many other things in the tax system, including Christmas parties and parking your bicycle at work. Why don't we recognise marriage? Harriet Harman.
The Prime Minister knows that it will not keep couples together. He knows that. He's just hoping that it will keep his backbenchers on side. But he hasn't answered the question, is how does this planned tax cut help reduce the deficit?
If we are going to get control of public spending in the long term in this country, we should actually be targeting the causes of higher spending. And one of the causes of higher spending is family breakdown. So I think we should do far more to recognise the importance of families, the importance of commitment, and the importance of marriage. And let me just say this. Any recognition of marriage we put in the tax system will also be recognition of civil partnerships, because commitment is important whether you're straight or you're gay. Harriet Harman.
So he's seriously saying he expects us to believe that he thinks that a £3 a week tax break, which will cost the Exchequer £500 million a year, will help keep families together. No wonder the Deputy Prime Minister is sitting so quietly by his side, because on this one, Nick agrees with me. We don't need it, it won't work, they should drop it.
I'm afraid the right honourable lady has a slightly short memory, because when she was sitting over here, an enormous recognition of marriage in the tax system was introduced by the Labour government in, wait for it, inheritance tax. They said, yes, they massively increased the threshold for inheritance tax, which should be transferred between husband and wife. Well, if recognising marriage in the tax system is such a good thing for the better off, why don't we do it for the less well off?
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Can I start by thanking the Prime Minister for his kind words just then and the kind words he gave to me when I was elected leader of the Labour Party. As he said, there will be issues that we can work constructively on, including on Afghanistan. And can I start by joining him in paying tribute to our troops who have died in Afghanistan. Sergeant Andrew Jones of the Royal Engineers and Trooper Andrew Howarth of the Queen's Royal Lancers who died on the 18th of September. Corporal Matthew Thomas from the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers who died on the 25th of September. Rifleman Suraj Gurung from the 1st Battalion, the Royal Gurkha Rifles, who died on the 2nd of October. And Sergeant Peter Rayner from 2nd Battalion, the Duke of Lancaster's Regiment, who died on the 8th of October. Each of them showed the highest dedication, commitment and bravery. We honour their memory and pass deep condolences to their families. We also honour Linda Norgrove, who died doing a simple job trying to make the lives of people in Afghanistan better, a necessary part of any political settlement. She too showed immense bravery. And can I say to the Prime Minister, we fully support the decision the Foreign Secretary took to authorise her rescue. And we must always make clear from all sides of this House that responsibility for her death lies solely and squarely with those who took her hostage. Can I ask the Prime Minister to update the House on his phone call with President Obama about the circumstances surrounding Linda Norgrove's death and the progress in the inquiry into those circumstances?
Well, I'm grateful for what the Right Honourable Gentleman says and the way that he says it, both about our troops and about the tragic case of Linda Norgrove. As he knows, I spoke to President Obama to really stress the point that we think it is extremely important. This is a joint US and UK investigation. I don't think there are any further details I can give about what happened that night. The picture still is unclear, but it was right, I think, to correct the early information that most likely was wrong about how Linda died. This investigation is now underway. When there is new information to bring to the House, we will bring it to the House. I think most important of all, though, is to keep the family informed at every stage. I'll be meeting General Petraeus tomorrow to discuss this further, and I particularly want to echo what the Right Honourable Gentleman says about the responsibility for this. It is an impossibly difficult decision to make about whether to launch a raid and try to free a hostage, and in the end we must all be clear the responsibility for Linda's death lies with those cowardly, ruthless people who took her hostage in the first place.
Ed Miliband. Can I thank the Prime Minister for that answer and for undertaking to keep the House informed, and he has our full support on the issue. Can I turn to the issue of benefits and say to him that we will work with him on his reforms to disability living allowance and reforms to sickness benefits, because they are important reforms and they need to be done. On child benefit, though, I think his own benches and the country at large do have concerns. Can I ask him, first of all, how many families where one parent stays at home will be affected by the changes that he has proposed to child benefit?
Well, in terms of the number of families who will be affected, I mean, higher rate tax is paid by 15% of taxpayers. And the decision that we've taken is to say that child benefit shouldn't be received by families where there is a higher rate taxpayer. Now, I accept this is a difficult choice, but the fact is, well, I've answered the question, how many? The answer is 15% of taxpayers are higher rate taxpayers. No. This is a difficult choice because as we deal with the deficit, we do have to ask better off people to bear their share of the burden. The fact is that today we spend £1 billion giving money through child benefit to relatively better off homes. We think that has to change, and I have to ask him why he thinks that's not the case.
Mr. Speaker, I may be new to this game, but I think I asked the questions and he should answer them. Now I'm afraid he didn't provide an answer, Mr. Speaker, to the specific question I asked. By my reckoning, there are hundreds of thousands of families where one parent stays at home. There are hundreds of thousands of families, and the question they're asking, Mr. Speaker, is this: why should a family on £45,000, where one person stays at home, lose their child benefit, £1,000, £2,000, £3,000 a year, but a family on £80,000, where both partners in the couple are working, should keep their child benefit? That doesn't strike people as fair. It doesn't strike me as fair. Does it strike the Prime Minister as fair?
What I believe is fair is asking better off people to make a contribution to reducing the deficit. Let me try putting it this way to the Honourable Gentleman. Think about it like this. There are thousands of people in his constituency earning 1/6 of what he earns. Through their taxes, they will be paying for his child benefit. Is that really fair?
I'm afraid it's 0 out of 2 on straight answers, Mr. Speaker. And look, we should try and change the tone of these exchanges, but he must provide straight answers to straight questions. I'm not defending the rich, Mr. Speaker. No.
Order! The Leader of the Opposition will be heard, and if there are colleagues chuntering away who then hope to catch the eye of the Chair, I'm afraid they're deluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
I'm defending the deputy head teacher in a primary school. I'm defending the police inspector, all of whom are asking a simple question. And you know, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister used to agree with me. The Prime Minister used to agree with me because he went before the election to Bolton in an event which I gather is called Cameron Direct. And he said this, I'm not going to flannel you. I'm going to give it to you straight. I like child benefit. I wouldn't change child benefit. I wouldn't means test it. I don't think that's a good idea. I agree with the Prime Minister. Why doesn't he?
The problem that the Honourable Gentleman the problem he has to face up to is he left us the biggest budget deficit in the G20. And he has got absolutely no this. He opposes our changes on housing benefit, yes? Yes? You oppose those? Yep. He opposes our changes on a benefit cap.
Order, I apologise for it. Just as the Leader of the Opposition be heard, the Prime Minister.
He opposes our changes on a benefit cap, yes? Just not... And he opposes our changes on child benefit. He quoted something to me. Let me quote him something back. We have to be frank with people and show our mettle. In times of plenty, giving child benefit to high earners is a luxury the country cannot afford. That was Alan Milburn, someone who cared. He's gone. I love this. All the Labour politicians who used to win elections have been thrown out the window. The Honourable Gentleman's got to face up to the truth. We've got a big budget deficit. You have to ask better off people to make their contribution. We say higher earners shouldn't get child benefit. Their child benefit is being paid for by some of the poorest people in our country. And it's about time you protected them.
I really want the Prime Minister to face up to the scale of the changes he is proposing. And I do say to honourable and right honourable members opposite, they should face up to the scale of the loss. Take a family on $33,000 after tax. If they've got 3 kids, they'll be losing £2,500 as a result of these changes. That is the equivalent of 6p on the basic rate of income tax. That is an enormous loss that the Prime Minister is inflicting on a particular group in the population. And if he wants to take people with him on deficit reduction, he's got to show that his changes are fair and reasonable. I come back to this point. I don't believe his changes are fair and reasonable. Does he?
Right. Well, I don't think it's fair for the poorest constituents in his constituency to contribute to his child benefit. That is what he's asking them to do. Let me remind him of something else he said. Let me remind him of this. This was something he said in July this year. Whoever is the Labour leader will, by the time of the spending review, have to show they have an alternative plan. Where is the alternative plan? This was a speech he made to an organisation called Left Foot Forward. Can I suggest he puts both of his left feet forward and tell us what the plan is?
The truth is, as the whole country will have heard,
order. People should stop shouting. The public hates it. It's bad for politics. It shouldn't happen. The Leader of the Opposition.
The truth is, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister has no defence of this policy. He cannot explain to families up and down the country why they're going to sustain this loss. And let's be honest, the Chancellor sits there. This policy has been a shambles from day one. The rest of the Cabinet knew nothing about it. The local government secretary said he found out from the media that it was being announced. The Children's Minister, I can't see him, he went on the run because he was too scared to defend the policy. I bet the Prime Minister wishes the BBC blackout had gone ahead. It was such a shambles. His confidence. On child benefit, Mr. Speaker, isn't it time the Prime Minister had the grown-up sense to admit this? He's got it wrong. He's made the wrong decision. He should tell middle-income families up and down Britain he'll think again.
The Right Honourable Gentleman has suddenly discovered middle-income families. We're now hearing about the squeezed middle. Who is it who squeezed the middle? Who is it who doubled the council tax? Who put up tax 122 times? Who taxed the pensions, the petrol, the marriages, the mortgages? And suddenly, having done all this, to middle-income earners. They want to stand up for middle-income earners. It is a completely transparent political strategy to cover up the inconvenient truth that he was put where he was by the trade union movement. It is just short-term tactics and political positioning. It's not red, it's brown.